Tyranny
Let's.
operates in darkness.
We are live.
We're using the disinfectant light of our voices to express, point out the elephant in the room. But okay,
Yeah,
seems to be our job.
it's funny because I actually had a chat with someone about this, and hopefully this doesn't. I'm going to share this while we intro. Um, I asked somebody like about the No Kings protest, which I wasn't at, and they said, "Oh, their parents went to it." And I said, "Really? So tell me about that." And he says, "Look, I'm Democrat, I'm liberal, but I'm not going to spend my time doing that." And I said, "Yeah, but do you have conversations about that with your parents?" And he goes, "No, it turns into an argument." And I was like, "Yeah, why can't we just agree? Like, okay, we just disagree." But I think even the No Kings protest has arguments among themselves. So
I think if you were going to just try to figure out a way to, he's not a king, as it turns out. Like that's
yeah,
mission accomplished.
he was elected. So I think trying to recall an elected president is actually what we want to avoid as a No Kings protest. But
it's just it's strangely named, oddly funded, and I don't think it changes a lot of minds. Other than that,
yeah. So Bob, how was the No Kings protest?
I don't know. I've seen videos of it on Instagram. That's the only exposure I've seen.
All right, so you weren't there. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Let's get our bearings here. It's April Fool's Day, and I'll try not to make some horrible joke like "Don't be a fool and invest in stocks" or something like that. But yeah, I won't do that. I won't embarrass the three of us. So Jeff Macke, Bob Morris, David Maris here for Wall Street Beats. We're going to talk a little bit about oil, which is clearly in the news. Restoration Hardware, I think, is RH. We have Jeff wants to talk about that. But first, on oil and gas, Bob, I mean, the news or the quasi news and oil dropping on this, is this what you expected? Is this how this is going to end, like kind of with a slow return to a normal price of oil, or are we permanently higher? What do you think of what's happened in the last little bit?
Well, you see normal price of oil. What's the new normal price for oil? Obviously it's pulling back today to $100 a barrel. All right, so we'll see. $100 a barrel is still a lot higher than $60 a barrel, obviously, that it was at a couple months ago. But again, the headlines are driving the movement in the oil price. It remains very volatile. As you noted, Trump's going to give a speech tonight at 9 p.m. And it's already come out and said that he expects to exit Iran and wrap things up in 2 to 3 weeks. He claimed this morning on a post in True Social Media that Iran has asked for a ceasefire, but he said they will not do anything until the Strait of Hormuz is open. So that's sort of his one demand, that if anything happens, if there is a ceasefire, if there is some sort of deal for peace, that the number one goal that must be attained is that the Strait of Hormuz be open. So we'll see. We've heard a lot in the past week, most of which is hard to verify, and some of it being countered by the news reports you get out of Iran and what they seem to be saying publicly. So we'll see how this sort of plays out. But again, oil's still at $100 a barrel. Now, I do think the market is buying a little bit more into the fact that there is some resolution near term, and that if you look at the 12-month strip and you look at the December and January contracts for WTI crude, they're at around $70 a barrel now, when they've been holding in around 75, when oil was front month spot price was even lower than where it is today at below 100. So the market seems to have eased back a little bit on its longer term expectations, and assuming that some sort of deal will occur here and this is not going to be a forever war. So what is the long term normal oil price? Again, I think it's around $75 a barrel. We no longer have this big oversupply that had been forecast 6 months ago for 2026. And there's a lot of oil that sort of has been permanently lost, and that you just can't turn your wells back up double the rate they were flowing before once you've turned them off. Yes, there's a lot of oil floating around in storage, different places. Yes, in the meantime, we have lifted sanctions on Russia that allow them to float oil and sell it to India and and some of those cargoes did get through the Strait of Hormuz into China. So, if all of a sudden in 2 weeks there was a deal, the Strait of Hormuz was open, yeah, you can see oil come back down to 80, 75, $80 a barrel near term. But we're not going back to $60 a barrel anytime soon. And, I would note on the side note, natural gas prices continue in the US, continue to be really acting independent of what's going on internationally, despite the fact that Qatari, some of their LNG facilities are offline. U.S. natural gas prices, without the ability to ramp up, you know, LNG exports at the moment, are really reacting to what's going on as they normally do to weather in being in the shoulder period as we come out of the winter and look to refilling storage through the summer. So if you look at nat gas, it's below $3, which is not surprising. And again, it's acting sort of independent of what oil's doing, independent of what is going on globally with LNG. So on the stocks here, obviously, yes, with oil pulling back, the names are down today, which they're going to continue to be volatile. It's hard, to pick and say, well, I think there's going to be a tweet from Trump tomorrow that's going to drive down oil. I'm going to sell all my energy stocks. That's just not something you can do or predict. Um, and I'm sticking with the names. Yeah, they're going to be volatile. They're down here. I'm not selling anything on this news. I think long term valuations are still solid. Yes, they're going to be volatile. Um, the one thing that's interesting, and I like to play around with options. I'm not doing this because I've got a full position in C&Q. But if somebody wants to sort of, play around here, maybe they don't have full exposure to energy, you can sell a June $40 put on C&Q for $1 here. You could this morning, which is 2.5%. If you get put the stock at $40 in June, which, given where valuations are, I think would be very cheap. At that point, you're getting at $40 a share, you're getting a 4.5% dividend, and you've made 2.5% on the dollar premium and selling the put out at June on the $40 put. So, just I'm not doing it. It's just something that popped in my head to say, well, what's interesting to play here with the volatility. I'm not buying or selling or trying to chase these things either way, and you just can't predict how the headlines are going to push oil prices near term, what Trump's going to say tonight. It's sort of something just if you don't have full exposure to energy or want to sort of play around, it was something I thought was interesting.
So you think $40 on CNQ is a good price, and you'd be interested if you didn't have a position to buy to build start to build one there.
Yeah, and again, if you don't get it down to 40, which very likely may not by June, you still make 2.5% on the dollar put premium you're collecting in the meantime for less than 3 months. So, but otherwise, I'm watching the gas names expand EQT, some of these to see what they do here in the face of natural gas below $3. I'm not doing anything with them. I'm keeping an eye on them. They may get to a point where they pull back to level where I get interested in buying or adding to those positions. I just mentioned that just given how natural gas prices are acting independent of oil, and how if we may get more of a pullback in the gas names and the oil names on any pullback in the commodity here.
Mm-hmm.
Bob, I asked you this last time we were together, and I'll ask it again. It's in the larger question is what can go right, and clearly what can go right is that we can reverse the prices of crude, which starts with them flattening out a little bit, which is kind of where we are at 100. But the larger question, in light of the last few days and the price action, how much of this was a reflection of just positioning going into month end, a combination that kind of mix you get of equities, treasuries, and oil, and kind of the unholy alliances there. A lot of people marking up their books. How much of do you think was reflection of that versus what's tweeted? I mean, it's I can't imagine the social media kind of utterances are getting all of that much play. How seriously are folks taking that in terms of putting real money at risk? It's largely unknowable, except for the people front running it overtly, kind of every time there is one of these announcements. But other than that, the target seems to change. And what are your scenarios in terms of what can go right and what can go wrong? What can go wrong seems to be it's not up to the U.S. anymore whether or not we actually end this. What could go right is that we just return to the status quo, only with slightly greater tension levels. Which do you think is more likely, and is there something I'm missing?
Um, as far as positioning in the quarter end, it's hard to say. I mean, were companies buying energy stocks up until yesterday to show now as reports come out for the first quarter that they owned energy at a point that there may be a peace deal and stocks pull back from where they were on March 31st. I don't know if a lot of people were trying to position for that. Maybe they were trying to say, yeah, we did own energy when it outperformed and was up in Q1. But as far as Q2, that's a little bit risky because you really have to make a call on, as you pointed out, what goes right or what goes wrong here in the second quarter. What goes right in terms of just oil prices pulling back is sort of what's right for the market may not be right for energy stocks. But what could go right in terms of oil prices pulling back here is that there's a peace deal in the next week. There's a ceasefire. Iran says, okay, we want to sort of work things out, and we have a new regime here that we're sort of going to back off on our extreme ideology and not demand that we be able to enrich uranium and develop a nuclear weapon, and we're going to let you come in and somehow put boots on the ground and airlift all the uranium that we told you we did enrich out of the country. And we're not going to enrich anymore, try to do that anymore. And Strait of Hormuz is open for business, and everything is hunky dory. I mean, that's sort of an extreme case. But, if you want to say what is the dream case, right? What could go right? That's the scenario where then oil,
Sure.
like I said, could pull back to $75, $80 a barrel, very quickly if everything's flowing and running. The fact is, you still got a lot of repair work on some refineries in Saudi Arabia, LNG facilities in Qatar and around the place, and some production that was shut in the meantime. So oil, again, it's not going to 60, but you could see a seven handle on the oil price very quickly in the everything goes right, like really right scenario. What could go wrong is that, like Iran has done for the last 20 years, they really don't mean what they say. They sort of stall. I mean, their strategy for more than 20 years has been stall, stall, stall. Yeah, we'll kind of go along with that. We kind of agree. But in the background, they're still doing what they want to do, which is try to enrich uranium with the ultimate goal of having a nuclear weapon and adhering to this extremist ideology. And right now, when you hear that Trump says they want a ceasefire, it's sort of like, well, who is it that wants a ceasefire? Who are you talking to? And you have headlines coming out, and it's just a couple of days ago that they said, look, they were really fiery rhetoric about fighting back, and everybody paying a lesson that's going against them, and this sort of thing. It was not the sort of rhetoric that said, oh, this is a new regime. We have regime change coming here, and you're going to have people in charge that are really going to play ball with us. I haven't seen anything that says that. But again, they're hurting. Their Navy's been taken out. Their Air Force has been taken out. And what could go wrong is you think you've got a deal and you really don't. You say, okay, give us your uranium. Well, yeah, we'll give it to you, but we got to. It's buried. We can't dig it up right now. So just wait, and you can't come in and look for it. And we really didn't mean all that we said. I mean, that's what
And
could go
also, it's
wrong.
like 50 pounds, the size of like 6 boxes of pizza, and we live in a state the
Right.
size of Texas. So good luck finding it. Godspeed. It's you can just there's not really a way to find it, even if we were allowed to look for it. It's my understanding. I don't.
Right.
Is
And
that not the case?
you've got a country of over 90 million people that there still are a lot of people that hold this extreme ideology. You've got Houthis and Hamas who are not going to give in to a more conservative, so to speak, ideology. And so what could go wrong is
Probably a
that you
lot
don't.
more of those people now than there were a month and a half ago before we started just lobbying cruise missiles. I would imagine.
Right.
I have no
I
real
mean,
dog in the fight, but that's crazy.
and whoever they're talking to that says, oh, they want a ceasefire, it doesn't seem to me that there's somebody, whoever it is, that might be in charge, wants a democratic society that's, going to allow protests. It's not going to continue to, um, you know, not let the internet exist in Iran and let people walk in the streets and, you know,
Yeah, we still.
have
I mean, we still haven't seen
yeah, voice their opinion.
Khomeini Jr. We still haven't seen
Yeah,
him, and
yeah,
so
and
we
there's
don't
not,
really know who's doing this. But I mean, it's weird because yes, I think all the news has been previewed that he's going to come out and say we're 2 or 3 weeks away. We're going to be doing this, but we need to see X, Y, Z, which might make the markets happy. It seems like it has been yesterday and today, but we're also sending another carrier group to the Middle East, and you know people should know like a carrier group sending a carrier group isn't like, hey, can you drive down the street? You're not just sending an aircraft carrier and 3,500 or 4,000 soldiers, but you're also sending battleships and strike fighters and attack, helicopter. You're sending a whole group of ships. And so I wonder if this is very Trump-esque of, I'm going to tell you one thing, I'm actually doing something else. 2 weeks from now, we find out that no, this is the second wave because they didn't say yes. So the uncertainty of it all, is this a head fake or not? It's just so tough to know.
Yeah, it's impossible to predict. And again, Trump is getting a lot of pressure both within the U.S. and internationally. With now, who is it? Spain, Italy said, well, they didn't mean it when they didn't let us, use one of their air bases. But other countries are sort of pushing back in Europe on the war, and there's, it's not playing well here in the U.S. in some of the polls. But at the same time, I don't see the regime change that the administration was looking to push for. I mean, I don't see, an uprising and the people taking over in a democratic society emerging from all of this. It just seems that whoever wants a ceasefire, whoever they're dealing with, still seems to hold reign over the country in a form or fashion. It's not all that different than what existed before, even though they may claim to give up some of their ideological goals. So,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
it's very easy, right, to say, listen, we have an agreement. We've damaged their capability of doing this. I mean, this was essentially what happened a couple months ago, or 6 months ago. They're not going to be able to rebuild. And then by the time, it's not as though they're going to have a nuclear power and a nuclear warhead, and fire it in the next year and a half. So it's going to be someone else's problem down the road, as long as he can sell the idea that this has put them way behind. So on the worst case scenario, it's an administration win will be painted that way. But I'm fascinated to see what happens in the next 2 weeks because I think I mentioned I bought more of the market a couple days ago, thinking that 6 months after these types of things were usually much higher. So let's see how that. I was wrong the first couple days, and hopefully some peace will break out. But I mean, moving carrier groups makes me think that we haven't seen the end of this.
yeah,
I
it's
don't know what it
impossible.
means.
It's impossible to predict, and oil's still sitting at $100 a barrel. So, we'll see how this
So
plays out.
your companies will keep printing money. I don't
Yes.
know. Does the war, Jeff, get people to go out and buy expensive, questionably made furniture at Restoration Hardware?
Apparently not.
I-
You have a company that levered up on they went from making overpriced furniture in America to housing developments to European stores. That turned out to be not a great bet, and so now they're wildly overlevered. I worry that they're canaries in the coal mine, Restoration Hardware being a particularly fragile canary. This is a market where the best of consumer companies, you can argue that they've been sold out, they've been beaten down so much. But as we saw from Restoration and Nike, which is a much more respected company, at least going into the call last night, there's still plenty of room to the downside. They're all faced with basically the same problem, which is there is no answer to the question, what are you going to do about energy and how is this going to affect the consumer in a month, in 2 months? It's Restoration Hardware, which is always reliably bonkers. They released their quarter in video form last night. If you guys haven't seen it, it's worth going over to the Restoration Hardware investor relations page. They sort of had background music as though you were at a nice spa, and they showed a lot of kind of soft focus footage of their restaurant in Paris, which is wildly, just overpriced and delayed. Quote from Albert Einstein talking about the work. As it turns out, Einstein had a lot of quotes, one of which is two things are infinite, the universe and human stupidity. He seemed to be referring to Restoration Hardware after that backed. At least that's how the market took it. Shares down 20%, really pushing on COVID lows at this point. And so you've taken a company that kind of tripled down on the luxury end of the market. Things are not going well. Um, and this is a little bit of an outlier case. It's a company that's held on for a long time. They've done a lot of short squeezes. Nike's probably more concerning for a longer term consumer perspective. The question there is, is this just a boomer company whose time has passed and who has leaned for, at least a decade too long into the Michael Jordan brand? They plan to address the World Cup by coming out with Jordan soccer gear. I'm not sure how Michael Jordan is associated with soccer. I'm not sure how that's going to sell in Europe. And, he's a cranky old golfer at this point. But, that stock is at 10-year lows, at least 10-year lows at this point, down some 15%. And again, these companies just don't have any answer. The turnaround there is taking a lot longer than expected. That's not particularly surprising for people who were paying attention to what's going on in the marketplace, but it also reflects that uphill battle for consumer companies right now. There's a really small, very skinny space that I'm interested in, where I'm looking for stocks that have low multiples, low expectations going into this year, because this year is clearly not going to be any good shakes. And to me, it's all about kind of prices at the pump. I like to keep it as simple as possible. And as long as prices at the pump are going higher relentlessly, meaning that every time you go there, we're still, with all the EVs that we've sold, we go to the gas station 9 times or every 9 days. That's the average. It's up from 7, but I don't care how wealthy you are. You start paying 20% more than you did 2 weeks ago, and that's going to make you spend less. You're just going to spend less on the margins. And we have a lot of marginal companies out there, in every sense of the word marginal, that are getting whacked. Their expenses are going up, their top line's going down. And if you're not just right there in the zeitgeist of fashion, if there's any expectations, you're in a lot of trouble. Nike seemed like it's making a bottom. They're obviously, it's a popular company to sell. If you're kind of on the brokerage side, it seems like one of those, to your point, you mentioned it's Robert, the idea that, should this company be higher in 6 months? It's beaten down. They still had about 80% buy rankings on it. And they just simply crapped the bed last night. It was just, the CEO's 18 months into it said this turnaround is taking longer than expected. We're not really getting any innovation. It's not a very good company right now. And
So
there's
I
not a
so
lot of
on
signs of
Nike,
turning.
I mean, on Nike, is it fair to say that if you got three people like us together at a cocktail party and you said, who's the greatest basketball player of all time, there'd be a big debate about Michael Jordan. But if you go to someone who's 18 or 25, they're like, hey, boomer, get over it. Like, let's talk about other stuff. I mean, is that fair when you think about the zeitgeist of Nike?
Oh yeah, the NBA is falling out of it, and the players aren't moving shoes now. It's that remember, it used to be the Final Four is going on this weekend, and that used to be a huge deal. The big axe fight over which company had the most Final Four teams, and who was sponsoring who and what kind of shoes were they wearing, as recently as 5, 6 years ago. No one cares. I have no idea whose shoes are being worn in the Final Four, but I know it's not going to move a lot of product. LeBron James is the other name that people would take if they're even willing to take up the argument of who's the greatest basketball player of all time. And no one's buying LeBron shoes. It's just not a thing anymore. And so the time has passed, and the company needs new ideas, and they just don't have them. They've made up some share in running, but apparel is just incredibly weak for them. There's not. It's not just a matter of them missing athleisure. They've missed fashion trends in general. If you're going to lean that hard to apparel, you can't just be an athleisure house. And so they've got some style problems going against them, but that's normal. It's cyclical. They've been a good company for 20, 40 years. They've gone through cycles in the past, but to have this long losing streak, they've got a few different things going on. One thing, structurally, they screwed themselves up by trying to go direct to consumers, open a bunch of stores. Turns out Nike's not very good at retail. So now they're going back into the retailers and trying to make up for it there, but that's just kind of shoveling sales from one channel to another. And the end result is there's a little stick in terms of moving from one channel to the other. They're having to mark down goods on their direct to consumer side while they sell stuff at retailers. That makes it harder for the retailers to sell things full price. And you end up right where you started, with a bunch of stuff in the discount bin with nothing moving sales. And they just seem tired. They've had Caitlin Clark under contract for 2 years. There is no Caitlin Clark shoe. And so
Yeah,
everyone
you've
says, oh,
mentioned this. You've
Nike's.
mentioned this. You've mentioned this for like 6 months and a year or so.
The
Like,
fact that I've been able to
I
mention
still
this for
can't
about the
believe
last
that.
6 months or a year, it's just baffling. And all you hear is, oh, go woke or go broke. They're so hip. She's the most famous athlete in ages in America. In a world where there are no great American female tennis players, no one's really following the golfers all that closely. Caitlin Clark is it. She is all that in a bag of chips. You spend millions to have her under contract, and you don't make the woman a shoe. And so, are
Right.
you woke because it seems like you give her a shoe, or are you just stupid? In which case, it seems like you would just be focusing on selling Jordan stuff to a bunch of soccer fans. It seems like the latter is the case, and that's a big problem. So, you got a lot of folks on the street giving up on them today. Does that make for a washout? Well, you wash it out down here, and it's gone from 34 times forward earnings to, with the guide down of earnings and the price reduction, to about 33 times forward earnings. Awesome. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
It-
that doesn't get me super excited when there's no turnaround in line. It's like the price of gas. As long as it's going higher, people move away. As long as your earnings are going lower, your turnaround story is just kind of crap. It's, if you're telling me the next 6 months are going to be garbage, but we're going to turn it around after that. Well, you've said that now for 18 straight months. If you're the management there, and people are right to give up on it. It's you, and that's one rule of these bear markets, is you have people giving up on sort of the beloved names they've been clinging to, and the idea that this is going to be a turnaround. It's down 14% today. Was the quarter that bad? I don't know, because I kind of thought they were really bad before this, so it's not like they said anything that particularly shocked me.
it's
But
really surprising there.
it's
So
washing out.
yeah, I just pulled up their press release, and North America down 11%, Middle East 7% growth, China 11% growth, but down 20% year over year. So that's probably either, I mean, it could be stuffing, who knows, but it also could be an easy comp. But the U.S. is twice the size of China, so that doesn't so much matter. Latin America down 4%, global down 11%. Converse is somehow down 203%. I don't know how that works. It's actually negative, but that's it doesn't sound like such a great report. So is it fair to say like Restoration Hardware and Nike falling knives for you, that you're just not touching
Oh,
until anything, like
absolutely
or
not.
are you shorting them here?
No, I'm wishing I was short them. It's these are just a question of how bad the news is going to be responded to. Again, it's there's two parts of this game. One is you got to have a pretty good guess how bad the numbers are going to be. That part was relatively easy if you're a cynic and weren't a fan to begin with. People that have been long the stock have been waiting for, again, any sign. You just sort of need the negativity to asymptote it flat. You don't need it to go back up. You just need it to stop going lower so fast. And they weren't able to pull that off. They pushed back any growth potential for the next few quarters at least. I'm a big fan of new CEOs. I love, a name like Target that actually does have a low multiple, and I think good things are going on. I think they're making smart moves, and I think it's easier to turn them around because they aren't encumbered by so much of a brand as they are just an execution aspect of it. And it's easier to improve a store in some ways than it is to kind of exhume Michael Jordan and make him a big deal again. Nike just seems lost, and
Yeah.
that's going to get people to sell. But what I worry about it for as a harbinger of quarters to come is the fact that the reason you're not seeing people come to buy in the dip right now is it's really hard to answer the question, okay, at $6 a barrel for gas in California, not much lower than that in the rest of the country, are people really going to be coming in to get those retro shoes? Are people, do they really need, the new high-end kicks? Nope, not really. They're going to go for the discounts, and man, margins are not so good in the discount bin. So,
Yep.
which was another problem that Nike has. And again, there's just not really any signs of improvement, and the stock still isn't cheap. That's a tough recipe to get people to buy the dip. And so, what you're seeing today is a lot of throwing in the towel. Normally, that would make you want to kind of get your contrarian, your ears perking up. You might do it for a trade, but the best case reports that we've had, Williams Sonoma, sharp contrast to Restoration Hardware, reported really terrific execution in the context of this tape. You saw a 7% bounce, and it was gone by a week later. So no one can answer the question, what are you going to do in a softening consumer environment? Now, the consumer, to their credit, I guess, it hasn't really buckled yet. in terms of what you're seeing in spending. You're seeing kind of echoes of it, but you always can if you're looking hard enough to see, bad polls, bad whatever. They haven't stopped spending in earnest yet, but again, they're going to crack. You need
Mhm.
something. You need something to change. You need that price of gas to stop just moving inexorably higher, or else you're going to start to see it pretty fast. And as you can see from if you look up at the gas prices versus the consumer discretionary over the last month, you're seeing down 10% for consumer discretionary, up 40% for gas prices. That's not a coincidence. That's just what you do. You guys both are stock people. With gas prices moving higher, you sell your consumer discretionary. Those things just happen.
Yeah, so just to wrap up on, I want to revisit Restoration Hardware for a quick second. It sounds like what you've described is they have a lot of issues, right? It's not just one issue. Why, if you and I and Bob and people who've seen companies like this before, it seems very obvious. You shouldn't be running a cafe. That's not your business. Not your strength. Your hotel or whatever you call these rental
Your
things,
housing
apartments.
developments, your airline rental business, your yacht experiences, no, all those things are
It's
bad. They sell furniture out of a castle, David. It's not a clean business model.
so why is it so obvious to anyone but not to them? And is it like, okay, if they clean that up, it's still a good business, or no, they also have in their core furniture business their problem. So get rid of that stuff. That's one step, but that's not going to solve it.
Gary Friedman's pulled a few rabbits out of hats in the past, and so he still gets a lot of credit for that. He's credited as a visionary in some ways. It's not entirely undeserved. He's done some great things in a bubble economy. It's a super business to sell expensive furniture for people's second homes. It's a nice idea. He famously, that stock went from 100 the last time it was this low to over 700 during COVID as people, kind of nested down. The prices of their homes went up, and that's an incredibly lucrative and short squeezing, crushing business. I don't know why it's obvious to him. Their business model has been super hard to explain. He has an ever shrinking cult. He's just a charismatic leader who has a one trick and does it really well. Loves to squeeze shorts, delights in the idea. It's a couple quarters ago the stock ripped 30%, and he was cackling and having a great time. Not so much yesterday. Yesterday it was just all gongs and harp music and very strange Einstein quotes as the stock was
I'm
getting
gonna
eviscerated.
look. I'm gonna take a look at that video because that sounds fascinating. It's always the sign of like Rome burning at a company when they start spending money on big videos or new headquarters or things like that. And
It was
good
bonkers.
that
I'm a big fan of the Gary calls because they're like Grateful Dead shows. If you're in the mood for one, you're in the mood for one. It's take a drug of your choice and just kind of zone out. But man, this was a new high. I've never seen someone release their actual quarter. The actual quarterly release came in video form. That was there. There was nothing to read. You just had a
yeah,
video. It's one of a kind, man. It's worth checking out. And I don't think it's going
absolutely.
to
We'll
be a
check it
trend
out.
because the market didn't seem to like it all that much. So I
Yeah,
don't think that's going to catch on.
yeah. I don't see Merck doing that anytime soon. I'm glad you mentioned Einstein because those Einstein energy bars are great. Not to say that I have to say that because they're a sponsor, but Einstein energy bar. I'll take the Einstein quote and the Einstein bar. Um,
It's a shame to see the late Dr. Einstein be besmirched this way, but it's he'll recover
e-
reputationally, I'm
exactly.
sure.
So one place that people, you said gas prices high, that tends to keep people away from maybe shopping for overpriced furniture. One place that they still go is the doctor's office and they still get prescribed things. Not a surprise, the XBI and the XLV has been outperforming. The XLV a little bit less. That's the pharma and all healthcare ETF. The XBI is biotech. The reason biotech's outperforming is both it's defensive, but we've seen something like $40 billion worth of deals in this last month, maybe 30, but it's depending on who you count, announced versus closed and all the rest. But unprecedented amount of deals. Lilly can't get enough of buying companies. Merck announced a deal yesterday or the day before. Today, Amgen announced a deal, not an acquisition, just a development deal with ZLab, ZLAB, or Zylabs, a stock that I own and have recommended. I can't say recommended, that I've said that I own and that I like, that I like, and if I didn't own it, I'd buy it just as a long-term play. So right now with all this uncertainty, biotech and healthcare is doing well. I wonder, this could not all be reversed quickly if the president comes out and says, "Look, peace has broken out," but we'll see. It's definitely been a safer haven for people this last couple months. So we've run a little long. So why don't we call it and say Happy April Fool's Day? Start of April is off to a good start. Knock on wood. And we'll see you tomorrow on Wall Street Beats. Go to wallstreetbeats.com or passes.com/Wall Street Beats and get more of what we're saying, including a report that I put out yesterday about Merck and some math that people aren't doing. See ya. Have a great day.
Take care, folks.
David, people aren't doing the math.